interesting research on the effect of eating seafood on various different aspects of our state of health. And one of them is on depression. This chappie, Joseph Hibeln, he's a captain in, I think he's a naval captain in America. I've been to a number of his presentations. He's really lovely, really friendly, really willing to talk and discuss things, and absolute advocate of eating fish because he's done heaps of research. This little selection of countries has shown that on the depression scale, sort of by percentage, so by percentage of population that are depressed, the more fish they ate, the less depressed they were. So in Japan, where they eat a lot of fish, they had the lowest rate of depression. Virtually nobody is depressed in Japan, very low. Whereas in Germany and New Zealand, where they don't eat anywhere near so much fish, they have a very high rate of depression, 5-6% of their population. So, and that goes across all sorts of other countries as well. But once that was flagged up and noted, a lot of other researchers went out and did their own research, and they sort of found the same thing. 3,200 Finnish adults, they said they found the likelihood of having depressive symptoms was significantly higher among infrequent fish consumers than among frequent consumers. Then New Zealanders, they did some research there, 4,600 New Zealand fish consumption was significantly associated with higher self-reported mental health status. So this is telling us something, that our brains really are happier when they've got whatever fish is supplying them with, and it may be a number of different compounds. Chances are it's lots. The German research, French research, 9,200 odd people, regular fish consumers, at least weekly, these are over 65-year-olds, at least weekly fish consumers exhibited less depressive symptoms and scored higher on the mini mental status examination. The Greek and Cypriot researchers, they found that in older people, one portion of fish per week was associated with a 42% lower risk of clinical depression. It's all supporting that idea. So that's not to say there aren't other studies and other research that hasn't found that, but there's a lot of indication that this is positive. Kira's going to be talking about the long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids in more depth later, but I'm going to mention some of these other compounds here. We've already talked about one of them a little bit, but I'm going to just mention choline for a second. Choline is considered a sort of B vitamin. It's not got a number, it's not a B number. This particular website shows, it's called the World's Healthiest Foods, and it gives various charts. It's not got everything in it, but it's quite useful, and I think it has quite good credentials. But choline is this sort of B family of vitamins, but it doesn't get destroyed with heat, interestingly, whereas B1 or 2 or 6, do get clobbered by heating and cooking more. But choline is very important for all sorts of cell membrane structures. So it's involved in acetylcholine, cholinergic nerves, phosphatidylcholine. These are all cell membrane compounds that enable nerve cells in particular, but all sorts of cells, but certainly nerve cells, the actual membrane of the cell to do its communication properly with the next cell or the next impulse or whatever is needed. And without choline, you will find that neurological function is compromised. Now, foods rich in choline, at the top we have, or in this list, shrimp, scallops, tuna, cod, salmon. Yes, eggs are also, the egg yolk is a rich source of choline, depending on what the animals were fed on. If the chickens are fed largely on grain and soya and corn, it won't have as much choline in as if it's out foraging for beetles and slugs and things like that, and eating grasses and stuff like that. But, so, organic eggs, please, obviously. Sorry?
Would it include egg roe?
Yeah, fish roe, absolutely. Fish eggs, very, very high in choline. Also, you see, the egg of the animal is for its own young's coherent nervous system. So this theme of infancy and producing a good next generation goes through all of these subjects. And then a quick look at vitamin B12. B12 is one of those absolutely necessary compounds, and it's very high in sardines, in salmon, in tuna, in cod, in scallops, and in shrimp. Yes, in lamb and beef, and obviously it's in all animal products, but it's particularly high in fish. So, pescatarians do better on the B12 front than vegetarians. I mean, vegetarians and vegans are obviously very, very limited as to their B12 options, and so they're all supplemented one way or another because they get major neurological dysfunction if they don't. And there's very awful stories of people who have been found to, well, I mean, it's very easy to miss a B12 deficiency, as the doctors present know, because it can be quite subtle. There can just be pins and needles. There can be all sorts of minor little symptoms that the patient doesn't realise is B12, and nobody else picks up on it until, you know, real desperate situations are reached where people are getting diagnosed with MS or Parkinson's or all sorts of things, and or they're left in a very, very bad state. Whereas it could have just been a B12 deficiency story and put right much earlier on, and this is common.
The majority of B12 deficient cases tend to be meat eaters who aren't aware of the situation.
Absolutely, it could be anyone. It could be anyone, because if you don't have it's a complex story for absorbing B12. You have to have your stomach intact, and you have to have your terminal ileum intact, and you have to have your gut bacteria intact. If any of those are damaged or not functioning as they ought, you can be clobbered by lack of B12, or if you don't have it in your diet.
Because it tends to come from a microbial source, and that's why we ingest the animal proteins. We have.
That's right. It's a sequence, isn't it? It's a basic sort of life forms to higher life forms thing, and you can there's many pathways that you can gain it or lose it or fail to gain it, but it can be devastating. And vegans do have a much higher rate of B12 deficiency.
Yeah, I was going to say the research that I've seen is that meat eaters tend to be higher because they're unaware of the issues.
Well, there's always that issue as well. Yeah. And if obviously if a vegan person goes to the doctor with pins and needles and falling over their own feet, and they say they're vegan, the doctor's more likely to think about B12 than if they're not. Of course, cereal grains are extremely damaging to the gut and to the gut microbes, and all sorts of pathways of B12 absorption. And so, if you're a cereal grain eater and a meat eater, people won't pick up necessarily that you could still be B12 deficient.
If you smoke those fish, what happens? The things you've been talking
If
about.
they're smoked fish, yep, it's all retained. It's retained. Yep, it's not lost from smoking. Yeah. Iodine. Back to iodine. This has become quite a big international story because, I mean, it's been known for a long time that iodine deficiency causes serious neurological deficit, and you know, we had Derbyshire Neck and we had cretins in England, and they're all over the world. You know, there's a large number of people who are classified as cretins. They're, you know, very low IQ, very short stature, very large bellies. They've got malformations. They've got, you know, impossible life situations to overcome. And it is terribly important, and everybody's known for a long time, and we've iodized salt. In England it isn't automatically iodized, in some countries it is. But after the Fukushima issue, whenever there's a big nuclear accident, iodine comes up in everyone's mind again, because if you are not replete with iodine and radioactive iodine comes your way on the wind or water or whatever, then your body will take up radioactive iodine and do you harm because it's trying to get its iodine. So you really do need to be replete with iodine in order to not be taking up radioactive iodine. So in 2011, this came up in a big way. Two researchers in Britain beavered away doing some very interesting work. One was a professor from, I think, Royal Free, Vanderpump, and he did some research on school-age children in England and Northern Ireland, girls. They were all between, I think, 13 and 15, so pre-parent stage, and he looked at their iodine status and they were all deficient, either mildly or very. And then Sarah Bath at the University of Surrey, I think, she did some brilliant work looking back at some research done in the 90s, early 90s, the Alsbach cohort of people, women and babies born, and she went back to their data and she looked at their iodine status and correlated that with IQ. The lower the iodine, the lower the IQ of their children. So iodine, you see, is an element. You remember your periodic table inside out, I'm sure, every one of you. Iodine is in a column on the left-hand side, and in that same column are bromine and fluorine. And fluorine, or fluoride, and bromine, chlorine is in the same column, but that doesn't have the same issues around it. But bromine and fluorine, especially fluorine, are very common contaminants in our environment, especially when politicians want to put it in the water. I mean, I don't know if you know, but the Labour Party, well, in their policy document, if they had got in this election in May, they would have fluoridated the whole nation's water. That was their policy. And that would have definitely caused lower IQ, because that's what fluorine does. It bounces out the iodine. It takes up the receptor sites so that iodine cannot be obtained. So in everyone, including unborn children. So, but adults as well. So in the few pockets of the land, our country, where the water is fluoridated, which areas around Birmingham and the Midlands, and a couple of other places, very small areas at the moment are fluoridated, but they have been tested and they do have lower IQ. You see what it does, iodine, everyone knows iodine is about the thyroid gland as well. So I'm talking about it in the brain as a brain essential at the moment, but it's also, its main use, 80% of the iodine in anyone's body is held in their thyroid gland. So if for some reason the iodine isn't getting in because the receptors are occupied by fluoride or by bromide, which is used in plastics and in fire retardants. Bromides are in fire retardants. So if you get a new car and you drive your new car around and then you start gaining weight, you think, is this just because I'm driving instead of walking? It might be because the bromide is coming out with fire retardants in your car upholstery and occupying your thyroid gland and not allowing it to take up the iodine that you should be getting from the fish that you're going to be eating after today. So this is an issue, because if we have the receptors for iodine occupied by these other elements that will sit on the same receptor site, they're in the same column of the periodic table, then we are causing hypothyroidism in a big way, as well as mental retardation, for want of a better word, or limitations. So it's a very serious thing, and do not let anyone fluoridate your water. It's very difficult to filter out. It's a very tiny atom, so you don't want it in your water. So Sarah Bath and Mark Vanderpump did this brilliant work in 2011. Yes, Anne?
Sorry, while we're talking about fluoride, there's the modern idea is not to rinse your mouth from fluoride toothpaste. I mean, on the one hand, the fluoride is good for the teeth.
Externally, just on an external basis,
But it is a kind of poison if you take too much into your body.
Certainly, it definitely causes hypothyroidism and cretinism, so kind of big reasons not to do it. It is fine externally, but as long as it's spat out. So, I would not be... I mean, when it comes to dental health, I'm going to do a whole talk on dental health, because that's a fabulous subject in itself. And I'm talking to dentists at the moment around about some of these issues, and it's amazing. But, I wouldn't be recommending, certainly children, using fluoridated toothpaste, because they are not good at not swallowing it. And we don't want to swallow fluorine or fluoride. So it's regarding thyroid hormones and needed for child development. Deficiency always impacts intellect. And not only that, by the way, like if you have fluoride, it gets into all your bones and causes fluorosis and damage to the whole skeleton. And it's visible in the teeth, because that's the bit of the skeleton you can see, but it affects the whole skeleton. So the last thing you want is any party fluoridating your water. There's a cretin. When they're born, they're quite distinct because they've got this big tongue, they get this pot belly, very low hairline, very poor structures. Now, low iodine levels are also now thought to be, because it's so connected to low functioning thyroid gland, to late birth dates. Any of the doctors amongst you, are you aware that there's an absolute explosion in 2-week late born date, whatever the right word is, the due date? People are going 2 weeks past their due date. That, I believe, is due to low-grade hypothyroidism in the mothers. And it's because the thyroid makes the body run, every cell it's like the governor of every cell, the metabolic speed of every cell. If the metabolic speed is slowed down through hypothyroidism, through lack of iodine, through fluoride or bromide, or just insufficiency in one form or another, for one cause or another, then every cell in the body will go slower, including the whole maturation of the baby thing. So you get slower delivery, slower coming to fruition. So, and I'm aware that a lot of babies, I keep hearing, oh, somebody was born 2 weeks late. Well, that's not. There's a due date. There's a real gestation period. There should not be a 2-week delay in babies being born. That's not right. There's something up. So yes, the IQ goes down worldwide 10 to 15%. Shellfish. Dairy products. We get iodine from dairy products. Kind of by the by. You see, they sort of dress the cow's udders with iodine as an antimicrobial. Iodine is fantastic antimicrobial. And they do a little sort of wipe to the teats with iodine, and so you get some iodine in your milk. But that was kind of only realised recently that that's how come we had enough iodine. It wasn't because people were eating enough. They were using it in the dairy industry. And funnily enough, organic milk wasn't getting this iodine treatment, and so people only drinking organic milk and not eating fish would have been iodine deficient because they weren't getting that little bit of iodine from the milk, just by chance. Which is an interesting one. So yes, there is now a lot of concern about the worldwide iodine deficiency, and the UK is now counted by the World Health Organization as iodine deficient, as a land. You know, it's an element, it's from rocks, and it all ends up in the water, which is why fish is high in it, and seaweed. But yeah, England is now mild to moderate iodine deficiency in Britain. All of Russia is in a bad way. Bits of Africa are in a bad way. South America has loads. Loads of iodine in South America. They're doing well. This is from the International Iodine Global Iodine Network. They're a fantastic resource, really brilliant global iodine network. I highly recommend you go and visit their pages. Yes, here's the paper by Sarah Bath, who I also have spoken to about this, brilliant woman at Surrey University. She took this, this was published in The Lancet just this year, 2 months ago. She took this cohort of people in the ALSPAC study, which is a big chunk of people in the Birmingham area, and correlated the Avon longitudinal study of parents and children, Avon area. They looked at parents and children and IQs. They had 1,000 pregnant women, iodine status and child IQ at 8 years, and reading ability at 9 years, and the results were mothers with mild to moderate iodine deficiency, and those with the lowest iodine were more at risk of having children with a lower IQ and a lower reading ability. I mean, we just don't need more low IQ people on Earth. It's not a good thing. I mean, if it's bad to be a Neanderthal, then it's bad to have a low iodine quotient. They also found that, so this is the graph. So there's the verbal IQ on that side. So the higher the better. And this is the mother's iodine quantity in her body. So the lower the iodine, the lower the reading ability. The higher the iodine, the better the reading ability in her child. So yeah, the common foods with iodine in, obviously, there's the fish, oily fish and shellfish. The conventional milks there, the organic milk has some in that chart. I was under the impression that it didn't have much. Maybe they've picked up on that and they're now using iodine, but I know that was an issue at one point. Yogurt, obviously, because it's made of milk, and then iodine in some of these things. But it really depends on where it's grown, where these foods are grown, and who's putting seaweed on their allotment, or not. Yeah, so that is a real issue. I'm not going to cover vitamin A in this lecture because it's not really, it's terribly important. Vitamin D, however, is a little bit of a surprise that it's also one of those essential brain nutrients. You know, we think of it as terribly important for the immune system and for anti-cancer properties and for the skeleton, but it's also very, very important for neurological development. And interestingly, of course, the skull is also a bone, set of bones. So we also need to build a good cranium. And vitamin D is going to be very important for that because it's about the whole skeleton. You know, we sort of think from there down often, don't we, about skeleton, but actually that has to be good and solid and protective of all the wonderful contents. Yes, in pregnant women, when there was vitamin D deficiency, it was found that their children at 6 years had impaired lung development if they were deficient at 18 weeks of pregnancy. They had neurocognitive difficulties at the age of 10, increased risk of eating disorders in adolescents, if their mothers had been deficient in vitamin D, and lower peak bone mass at the age of 20. So we've all lived through the era of sunblock. That is going out now, thank God, because that was such folly. There is free vitamin D to be had from sunlight every summer. So please ditch the sunblock. Please use these few precious months of sunshine. We only have a third of the year in the south coast of England where we can get free vitamin D. Don't squander it. It's worth every moment in it. And the best time to be in the sun to get your vitamin D is the middle of the day. Any advice that says go out in the morning and the evening is wrong, because you will not get your UVB at that time of the day. And the UVB, ultraviolet B, is what you want to make vitamin D, and you need it on bare skin with no glass in between you and the light. So you need to be out in the middle of the day. Solar noon is 1 o'clock when we're in British summertime. So pregnant women definitely need to be out in the sun. There's many factors in sunlight that are important, but UVB and vitamin D production is one of them. So here's in over 65s, cognitive impairment and vitamin D levels in Britain. Cognitive impairment going up here, and vitamin D going down on this arm. So the more deficient these elderly gents became and ladies came, the less their brains worked. So, I mean, they're quite wide bars, range of different people, but that's the line of best fit through there. So clearly, it's about so much more than just your skeleton or your immune system. Cognitive impairment is a reality in people with insufficient vitamin D. So vitamin D content of common fish species goes up from mackerel, which has some, and wild salmon that has loads, full 1,000 IU in 100 grams of wild salmon. Lovely, and that's what you had for dinner. But yes, it's a sort of, they've all got some vitamin D, which is all good. Selenium is another of these really super essentials. There's some totally essential compounds that humans need. Again, it's one of the elements in the periodic table. It's not in the same column as iodine, it's in the next one along. But selenium is used in many, many compounds in the body. Very antioxidant, strongly anti-cancer. It's one of those pivotal factors in your main detox agent, which is glutathione, and that is a selenoprotein. It has selenium in it. Glutathione, your body's top detox compound, glutathione, and it relies on selenium. It's also involved in getting iodine into the thyroid. You have tetraiodothyronine, which has 4 iodines on it, and it is through selenium's activity that you get it to triiodothyronine, and then that is actual thyroxine, the active end of thyroxine. All the iodine in the world won't make your thyroid work properly without selenium. So selenium, terribly important. Everything works in a network fashion in life and biology. Nothing's really on its own. They all work in a integrated way. So very important role for reproduction, cardiovascular disease and mood disorders. Lots of different selenium-dependent enzymes to do all sorts of work in the body. Very strong neuroendocrine aspects, as in thyroid and other things. And marine fish and shellfish are the main source. Brazil nuts, the next source. Now, selenium is an element in the soil, but it's very hit and miss whether this bit of soil or that bit of soil has selenium in it. Very hard to know. Bits of Brazil are famously replete with selenium, which is why Brazil nuts are a good source of selenium. So organic Brazil nuts are a good source. But there's Britain's selenium levels. Really, it's kind of all over the shop, isn't it? I mean, here we are. Not impressed. Not impressed. Not a lot of selenium going on there. You want to be the red area, because it's so vital. So
it's mountainous areas, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Who knows? I mean, yes, it might be about the volcanoes. Yeah. You're never going to know, looking at a plate of food, if it's got any selenium in it or not. You just can't judge, which is why it's something I take regularly. But classically, it's in tuna, shrimp, sardines, salmon, cod, scallops. So that's what we're talking about today, the fish. And there it is, right up there in the sea. Because everything ends up in the sea. You know, all the elements from on the rocks of mountains or whatever, gradually, it ends up in the sea. So it's a more reliable source of most elements than the land. So contaminants. In 2004, you might all remember, an American edict went out that the issue with fish was the concern about mercury. And it's a very, very proper concern, because mercury is one of the most toxic elements, another element, known to man. It's known to be a neurotoxin. I mean, the recent lecture I went to from the IAOMT, the International Association for Oral Medical Toxicology, big international organisation. I was at a lecture recently, and they started off with the heading, "Never has so much harm been done to so many by so few as in dentistry." Dentistry will come another time. But this advice about seafood is about methyl mercury. Now, methyl mercury is a slightly different way that mercury is bound, and is actually even more toxic as a result. And it's coming out of as a pollutant from all sorts of industries and natural processes, and it also ends up in sea, like everything else. So there was this great concern, and a proper concern, and this edict went out: you shouldn't eat more than 340 grams of fish per week if you're pregnant. So I, and probably a lot of you, picked that up somehow through the media, and we avoided eating too much fish, and dioxins as well, which is the other major industrial toxin that's out there that does just as much horrible harm to the fetus as mercury does. It's again an element. It's highly toxic, potent neurotoxin. Exposure to methyl mercury leads to impairment of peripheral vision, so the eyes, disturbances in sensation, pins and needles feeling, a bit like B12 lack of coordination movement, impaired speech, hearing, walking, muscle weakness, affects the fetus more than the mother, and leads to infants with severe disabilities. And you may have all heard of the Minamata disease. Minamata disease, ring a bell? Minamata in Japan, where there was this awful toxic sludge ending up in the Sea of Japan, I think it was called. It took ages for them to work out that it was the mercury doing it. They had all these deformed babies and terrible deaths, and they got it. It's the mercury. They worked it out. This is the sort of sequence that it goes in. So volcanoes release mercury. You can't stop volcanoes. There's a volcano depositing mercury. It ends up everywhere. Coal plants, mining, all this stuff ends up with methyl mercury hitting our oceans. And then the krilly things eat it, and they get eaten by bigger fish, and they get eaten by the big fish, and they get eaten by the big fish. And it accumulates up the food chain. The EPA, which is the American it's called the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA advice is eat unlimited amounts of these fish, eat trout and tuna, canned tuna, a few times a week, and eat shark, pike and albacore and halibut only a few times a month. Well, I mean, that still seems like quite a lot of fish they're recommending. If they're trying not to eat methyl mercury, I would have thought they should have reduced those figures a lot more. But that was how their edict went out. Maybe they have very tiny portions, I don't know, but that seemed like a really quite odd way to put it. But there it is, it accumulates up the food chain in that way. The way it does damage to the baby's brain is by stopping the dendrites of the nerves from growing. I was shown at this IAOMT event that I was at back in June, a video of a nerve, a neuron, under the microscope with the dendrites growing out, and then adding a drop of methyl mercury, and they just sort of retract again. Now the dendrites are there as the connectivity of the neurons. You know, how many neurons have we got? Loads. And so if the connectivity between them is diminished by the presence of methyl mercury, bang goes your intelligence. So there it is. That's how the healthy cone, growth cone of the dendrite should look. Yet when mercury is added, these bits just get clobbered. So where is mercury? Which species is it highest in? As we saw, the bigger ones, the tilefish. I don't even know what a tilefish is, but it comes up whenever you look at mercury in fish. Swordfish, shark, and tuna. Because they're huge fish, they accumulate the most methyl mercury. Yellowfin tuna, sea bass, halibut. Lower amounts are in skipjack tuna, skate, cod, spiny lobster, hake, trout, crab, flounder, sole, haddock, plaice. Very low levels in mullet, mackerel, pollock, squid, salmon and mussels. And the lowest still in anchovies, sardines, tilapia, oyster, shrimp, clam, salmon, tin salmon and scallops. So, dioxins. These are also industrial toxins that are flooding our waters. You cannot escape them, they're appalling. Do you remember Yushchenko, Viktor Yushchenko? He was given a soup by the Russians and it was poisoned with dioxins. That's what happened to his face. He was a nice, good-looking guy and he ended up a pissed off, not good skin guy. That's the sort of effect. It's considered extremely toxic. There was a big dioxin exposure in Italy in 1976, I think, Svenko or some such name. And the babies are born with twisted spines and deformed faces, and it's really hell. It's really appalling. So very like the sort of Minamata disease with mercury, so dioxins do terrible things to people, and highly toxic. Damages short-term skin, liver function, nervous system and endocrine and immune and reproductive system in long-term exposure. So very bad news. And where are the dioxins? Well, they're high in eel, cod liver. So that cod liver oil might be an issue for some people. Sardines are quite high, a bit too high. Lower in these ones, lower still in these, and lowest in these. And I've highlighted and put in bold the things that are low in mercury and low in dioxins are salmon, mackerel, squid, prawn, shrimp, scallops, pollock, tilapia, mullet, mussels and oysters. So that's good to know. You're low on dioxins and low on methyl mercury. This is an English photograph of fish chop looking at blood mercury and selenium. Now the thing about mercury is that when it gets into our bodies, we do our best to detoxify it with our beautiful detox system headed by glutathione. And glutathione relies on selenium for its activity. So this issue with mercury is all about selenium in the end, your selenium levels. This study published in the British Journal of Nutrition a few years ago that mercury and selenium tissue concentrations were directly associated with your fish intake. So okay, we know where we're getting these things from the fish. That clarifies how they're getting in. But no toxic levels of mercury were found, quote, which is reassuring because of the known health effects of fish consumption, especially oily fish. And then they found that previous studies suggested that selenium protects against the toxicity of mercury and that fish is an important source of both. So there we are, we've got the mercury in fish, but we also have the selenium in fish. This study helped to clarify some of that. 6 groups of rats, 10 in each group. They had either normal levels or toxic levels of mercury given to them in their food. And then each of those 2 categories, normal mercury or toxic levels, they then either had low, medium or high selenium. Low, medium or high selenium, with low mercury or high mercury. And they found toxicity of methyl mercury depended on the selenium level. And that the high selenium diet entirely prevented methyl mercury toxicity. Great. They come in the same fish. And then when we look at the selenium level and the mercury level of these fish, mercury in blue, selenium in green, we see that about the swordfish and the pilot whale, they have more mercury or the same amount of mercury as selenium. But all the others have more selenium than mercury. Skipjack tuna, for all its high mercury level, is actually very high in selenium, which is why we see that the Japanese who eat tons of tuna are not all falling apart with neurological dysfunction as a result of the mercury they're ingesting, because they're also getting a load of selenium and iodine and B12. They all work together. Evidence of subtle neurological impairments attributable to mercury were previously found in New Zealand, where shark was the primary exposure source, and the Faroe Islands, where whale meat was the primary exposure source. So where they were having those fish, they were having neurological problems because those fish don't have high selenium. So it's starting to make a lot of sense. So then when we look at the people who are eating plenty of fish, then we should be able to see population-wide prove or disprove this theory that the selenium is protecting us from the mercury. So when they look at maternal fish consumption, so this is the amount of fish a mother can eat while in pregnancy, And then looking at the children they produce and their ability to do fine motor control, which is a way of gauging their neurological function. We find women who ate no fish, they had a 30% rate of damaged neurological function in their babies. When they ate some fish a week, up to 340 grams, then they had fewer babies with neurological deficit. And when they had more than 340 grams a week, which I use that figure 340 because that was the amount that they said eat less than that because of their fears about mercury in 2004. But those mothers that ate over 340 grams a week, they had even less damaged children in terms of their motor control, fine motor control. So that does support. This was in the Lancet, and this was our lovely Professor Hibbeln in the Lancet. He showed that there, and he also showed that verbal IQ went in the same sequence. The more fish the mother ate, the less damaged was the child's IQ. The pro-social skills, again, the same pattern. The less damage, the more fish. Again, the motor skills and different aspects of measuring the child's development. In all cases, the more fish they ate, the better the child was. We found no evidence to lend support to the warnings of the US advisory that pregnant women should limit their seafood consumption. By contrast, we noted that children of mothers who ate less than 340 grams per week of seafood were more likely to have sub-optimum neurodevelopmental outcomes. So this is all adding up in the favour of eating more fish if you want fully formed, neurologically healthy babies. The World Health Organization, finally, in January 2010, this big Rome summit that happened, they acknowledge fish as an important food source of energy, protein, and a range of essential nutrients, and fish consumption is part of the cultural traditions of many people. Emphasise the benefits of fish consumption to reduce mortality from coronary heart disease as well, because there's a whole fish oil side to heart disease. Mortality from coronary heart disease associated with not eating fish, there is more coronary heart disease in people who don't eat fish. And they emphasise the net neurodevelopmental benefit to offspring of women of childbearing age who consume fish, particularly pregnant women, nursing mothers, and the neurodevelopmental risks to offspring of women of childbearing age who do not consume fish. So it is now a changed scene from above. The science has come in. Fish eating is good. I worried about it. I'm sure many of you worried about it. And it was a legitimate concern, and it wasn't folly, but it ends up that we were wrong. It's better to eat the fish. So the long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids is called LC puffers. Long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids. Polyunsaturated means there's lots of double bonds in these fats, and they're long 20 to 22 carbon chain, long-chain fatty acids. So these essential ones, the DHA, the EPA, and the AA, they are absolutely essential for brain function and brain development and structure, because they actually make up about 10% fresh weight of the brain, the human brain, and 50% is dry weight, meaning if you've extracted the water. And of that, arachidonic acid and DHA make up 23% of those lipids. That is a very significant amount. The highest concentration of DHA is found in the retina, and both DHA and AA have very important structural and functional roles within the human central nervous system. The coronary heart disease story is quite interesting because it is found that the lower your fish intake, the higher your risk of heart disease. Eating fish once or twice a week compared to eating no fish is associated with a 50% lower 20-year fatal coronary heart disease risk, and stroke as well. And the normal servings, 100 grams of edible portion. This is the sort of amount of DHA that you're going to get. Herrings very high in DHA, salmon high, mackerel pretty high, swordfish is quite high, but it's got an awful lot of mercury, so I'd reckon further on the. I always plump for the herring and the salmon and the mackerel rather than swordfish. Tuna's great as well, and it goes down from there. But all the fish are very high in DHA, obviously, because they're eating the algae from which they produce it. This Hibbeln, maternal seafood consumption in pregnancy and neurodevelopmental outcomes in children. Again, he's looked back at the ALSPAC group, the Avon kids in the 90s, early 90s. This was published in the Lancet, and he found that of 11,000 odd pregnant women assessed for seafood consumption at 32 weeks gestation, when they're nearly giving birth, they found that they compared the developmental, behavioural and cognitive outcomes of their children from age 6 months to 8 years. The percentage of children with low verbal IQs versus the estimated polyunsaturated free fatty acids from seafood. the more... Oh, let me work my way around this graph. Sorry, I've just forgotten how this one works. The estimated omega-3 intake, the more omega-3 they took in, the better their...
The smaller the percentage of children with low verbal IQ.
Yeah, they have a smaller percentage of low verbal IQ. It's a sort of double negative graph. Yeah, but the higher their DHA, the better their verbal IQ. So here's our lovely photograph of fish on an English fishmonger. Best nutrients for the least toxins. That's the balance that we're going to try to strike. What's the best thing to eat for the least negative effects? Salmon and mackerel. Best in white fish are pollock and mullet. I really like the wild Alaskan pollock as well as the wild Alaskan salmon. The Alaskan government handles, I'll come to that, but they handle their fish brilliantly, and the seas are pretty damn clean. And the best shellfish are squid, shrimp, prawns, scallops, mussels and oysters. Squid are basically very good pasta substitute. If you're off grain, squid rings make a fabulous alternative to pasta. I can highly recommend it. And you can open them out and make it into lasagna as well. So the sustainability side of the fish, these organisations are really good at protecting the fish stocks and the quality. I'm quite comfortable in using all of these labels if I want to check the quality. The Alaskan government has completely revolutionised the way that the salmon fishery is done, because they only allow any fishing of the salmon once a certain number have come up to spawn and to go in the hatcheries, which is their native hatching grounds. And they only let anyone fish for anything after they've done that. And after that, the life of the salmon anyway just ends up being eaten by something. So it may as well be us. And they only let anyone fish them after they have assured the future stocks. So I'm really, really pleased with the way the Alaskan government and the whole of the Alaskan people are involved in this. The Aquaculture Stewardship Council are great, the Marine Conservation Society are great, and so are the Marine Stewardship Council. Yeah, they're all really doing a good job. They're all on top of this now. So ask your fishmonger, ask whoever it is that you're seeing and getting your fish from, if they are, using these controls. Then you're not harming the future. You're working with a sensible system. Now that doesn't show up so well, but that is a photograph of wild salmon compared to farmed salmon. I mean, one of them glows and the other one is just sort of poor second. They actually feed the farmed salmon wild fish. They're having to feed it on 3 lots of wild fish in order to get 1 lot of fish out of it. It's not sustainable. I mean, they are getting better. They are trying to get on top of this because they know that is not sustainable. But the wild, it's meant to look like this. These fish are basically obese. That's not healthy fat. Those white lines are not healthy fat. And they get metabolic syndrome of their own. And that's what it looks like. The wild animal, just like any wild game, is lean, but the fats are the right fats and the right quality. So estimates of wild salmon on the coasts of Norway, they went from 1983 to 2008. There were lots of them and they've gone down and down. They had a bit of a rally, but they're much lower than they were back in the 80s, and who knows what they were before that. Whereas in Alaska, they've got better. They're really being well managed. They came in when it was heading to a bad state, but they brought it back and they continue to do that, and the whole nation is behind it because they know that it works so well. Yeah.
I just want to say, if you go to buy salmon and you want to get salmon from this sustainable source, be very careful with the labelling. If it says Alaskan, then it has to be from this.
Yeah.
If it says wild salmon, believe it or not, it can be farmed and called wild salmon.
Because it's called the wild species, but they can farm that species.
So
Yeah.
you must get, if you want the
Wild
good
Alaskan.
salmon that's sustainable, you must get Alaskan wild salmon.
And you should be able to recognise it, because you've seen now what they look like next to each other. The wild Alaskan is a glowing orange pink. It's got sort of marvellous qualities to it. Your eye will recognise something special in it, and your tongue definitely will.
Is there a difference between organic farmed and non-organic?
It's probably a bit better, but I wouldn't.
Still not.
I only eat the wild Alaskan. And there they are. But interestingly, there's not actually that many of them. The total is only about 50 million salmon. Now there's 60 million Brits. That's 1 each a year. Now, obviously, when you don't eat the whole thing. It's too much. They're quite big. Oh yeah, then there's this marvellous local organisation called Catchbox, although they've just changed their name and now they're called Fresh from the Boat, which is two local fishermen. But yeah, they do a local fishing, sell it the same day, you pay in advance and you get whatever they've caught. And we learned a lot from this because we didn't know about some of these fish. And so when we were involved in this, we'd pick it up every other Thursday and we got a couple of kilos of fish.
Is there no disadvantage to scavenging fish like mackerel and mullet, apart from the flavour? Because some people say it's preferable to buy frozen fish, which is frozen way out at sea because they come from clean water.
This might be true.
Locally caught fish comes from polluted water.
Cheap.
Yeah. No, I'm quite a fan of frozen fish. I mean, you can get extraordinarily good Alaskan Pollock frozen. It's only something like £3.20 a kilo. Now, it's not got the fish oils because it's a white fish, but it has got the iodine and the B12 and the selenium. You know, it's got many of these other compounds that are worth having. And £3.20 a kilo, I use that for my fish curry.